Until you take full ownership of who you are, someone else will. Carl Jung wasn't trying to scare you when he said that he was holding up a mirror. One that reveals what we often choose not to see. A mirror that dares you to look deeper past the layers you've built into the truth you've spent years ignoring. See, most people think they're in control of their lives. They believe they're the ones steering the ship. But if you look closer beneath the pride, behind the habits, under the masks, it becomes obvious. They're not living freely. They're being guided, shaped, even manipulated often, without realizing it. They're following scripts they never wrote. Scripts designed by parents, teachers, old relationships, painful memories, and deep-rooted fears. They're living according to rules they never questioned, behaviors they never consciously chose, voices in their heads that sound like their own but aren't. They're not living, they're performing. Performing for approval, for safety, for love. The tragic part, they don't even realize it's a performance. It feels natural because it's all they've ever known. Jung had a name for this hidden influence, the shadow. It's everything you reject about yourself, everything you pretend doesn't exist. All those emotions and instincts you label as bad and weak or ugly. But pushing those parts away doesn't get rid of them. It just drives them underground. And from that darkness, they begin to control you. The shadow operates silently. It doesn't shout or scream, it whispers. It shows up in your decisions, your triggers, your relationships. It picks who you love. It decides how you respond to conflict. It becomes the ghost that runs your life, while you convince yourself that you're free. But here's the truth. If you've never stopped to question your beliefs, if you've never examined your habits, if you've never asked yourself why you react the way you do, then chances are, a lot of your identity isn't really yours. How much of your personality is actually authentic, and how much of it is just armor? Just a collection of survival tactics you learned growing up in a world that didn't give you the space to be your full self. That's the heart of Jung's warning. Until you confront the parts of yourself that make you uncomfortable, the needy, insecure, jealous, ashamed, angry parts, someone else will always be holding the strings. You'll be at the mercy of your triggers, pulled into roles you didn't ask for, pressured to explain yourself, to defend who you are, to prove your worth again and again. But you won't call it being controlled. You'll call it just who I am. And that is the invisible prison. The one you carry with you everywhere. The one no one ever tells you is there. The one Jung tried to expose so you could finally break free. But breaking free isn't easy. You don't just wake up one morning and suddenly own yourself. It doesn't work like that. You have to earn it. You have to fight for it. You have to reclaim every part of you that you gave away to be accepted. Every emotion you buried, every truth you denied, every instinct you silenced to survive. And that journey, it's brutal. Because taking ownership of yourself means facing everything you'd rather avoid. It means staring down your envy, your rage, your shame, your guilt, your fear of being invisible, unloved, forgotten. It means recognizing that so much of your kindness was fear in disguise. That your silence wasn't strength, it was shame. That your personality, it might have been born from pain, not purpose. And when you finally see all that, something inside you shifts. Something either breaks or wakes up. Because once you see what's been owning you, you can't go back to pretending. You can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. And the real question becomes, now that you've seen it, what are you going to do? Most people run. They distract themselves. They chase noise, attention, performance. They become louder, busier, more reactive, more impressive, anything to avoid the silence. Because the silence holds the truth. But distraction doesn't heal the shadow, it feeds it. But if you stay in the discomfort, if you sit with it long enough, if you face the mirror and refuse to look away, something starts to change. Bit by bit, you begin to reclaim your power. You catch yourself pretending. You hear that false voice in your mind, and for the first time, you recognize it's not yours. And slowly you replace it with your real voice. The voice that doesn't need applause, the voice that doesn't chase validation, the one that's not afraid to take up space And when that happens, people start to notice. They feel the shift even if they can't name it. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You don't defend your choices. You're not playing the game. You've stepped out of it. And that kind of presence, it doesn't go unnoticed. It carries weight. It changes dynamics. It makes people uncomfortable, not because you're harsh, but because you're free. They feel it. That you're not owned anymore, not by fear, not by insecurity, not by their opinions, not even by your own ego. You're owned by one thing, yourself. And that's real power. Not the kind that yells to be heard. The kind that sits in silence and is still felt. The kind that doesn't shake when tested. The kind that doesn't seek approval but stands in truth. And when you start moving through the world like that, people don't interrupt you. They listen. They don't challenge your presence. They respect it. Because they can tell there's no performance here, no mask, no need. You're not reacting from some fractured identity. You're acting from wholeness. And wholeness is rare. That's why it's magnetic. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who the world expected, not who you had to be to survive, but who you are underneath all the roles, all the noise, all the pretending." And when you arrive at that place, when you own every fragmented, forgotten, feared piece of yourself, you become untouchable. No one can shame you for what you've already embraced. No one can manipulate you with wounds you've already healed. No one can control you when you've stopped hiding from yourself. And that's the shift. That's the path. That's ownership. So the next time something triggers you, the next time you feel the need to explain, to defend, to prove, pause. Just pause. And ask yourself, who's speaking right now? Is it the real you, or is it the version of you that you created to stay safe? Because if you're not choosing your response, something else is. And that something owns you. That's what it means to be owned, not by a person, but by a pattern. But this moment right here is where things shift. Because now you're done being owned. Now you're waking up to something more. Now you're becoming the master of your own life. And once you choose that path, everything changes. Most people spend their entire lives building a version of themselves designed to protect, not to express. Their personality isn't who they really are. It's the most acceptable, most likable, least threatening version they could construct in response to a world that scared them. And maybe that's what kept them safe once. But it's not what will make them free. That's what Jung was warning us about when he said people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And he was right. We stay busy, we stay distracted, we stay on autopilot. Because the truth, the real, raw, honest truth, is terrifying. It's terrifying to admit that you're tired, that you're angry, that you've been performing for most of your life, that you've twisted yourself into knots just to be accepted, that you've built your identity around other people's comfort, other people's applause, other people's needs. And now you're not even sure who you are without all of that. And this is where the war begins. The quiet inner war most people never even realize they're fighting. Because as long as your identity depends on someone else's reaction, you're not free. You're leased, rented, owned by whoever you're afraid to disappoint. You belong to the people who validate you. You belong to the roles you think you can't leave. You belong to the past that taught you how to survive, but never how to thrive. But the moment you stop running, when you finally sit down with yourself in the silence and decide not to escape, that's when the transformation begins. That's when you start to see the truth of your life. You begin to recognize the code you've been operating from. You look at the people in your life and realize they're not random. They're reflections, mirrors of something inside you that needs healing. Your triggers aren't flaws, they're clues. They're pain points pointing toward wounds you haven't faced yet. And your habits, the ones that drain you, the ones you feel addicted to, they're not you either. They're just strategies you picked up along the way, ways to survive when you didn't know how to cope. And suddenly you wake up. Not in some dramatic, movie-like way, but in small, piercing realizations that cut through your illusion. You see how much of your life has been a reaction, not a choice. A reaction to old pain, to childhood shame, to rejection, to fear. You've been reacting for so long. You forgot what it feels like to actually choose. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're not asleep anymore. You're not blindly playing a role. You're starting to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And that's the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole. You don't just toss your shadow away. You bring it home. You understand it. You integrate it. You own it. Your darkness isn't your enemy. Your shadow isn't here to ruin you. It's here to complete you. It carries your instincts, your boundaries, your lost fire, your ability to say no without guilt. All the parts you needed to survive but had to bury to be accepted. They're still in there. And now it's time to dig them up. Not so you can be reckless or reactive, but so you can finally be real. So you can say, yeah, this is part of me, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. Because when you own those pieces, when you stop running from the things that used to own you, you become something new. You become dangerous, in the best way. You become someone who doesn't need to be understood, who doesn't beg for approval, who doesn't mold themselves to make other people comfortable. You stand alone and still stand tall, and people feel that. They feel the difference between someone who's pretending to be confident and someone who's actually rooted in themselves. They feel the stillness, the presence, the calm strength of someone who's no longer at war with their own reflection. And that energy, it's disruptive, because most of the world is built on performance. It rewards fake smiles, surface-level confidence, quick comebacks, and polished personas. But you've gone deeper. You didn't build your identity from applause. You earned it in silence. You found it in the darkness. You sat with your shame and didn't flinch. You stopped running from your pain and that kind of ownership. That kind of authenticity, it cannot be faked, and it cannot be owned by anyone else. This is what Jung meant. You don't become free by pretending to be stronger than others. You become free by refusing to be a stranger to yourself. So ask yourself, why are you still trying to prove anything? Why do certain people have the power to ruin your day? Why does guilt creep in when you set boundaries? Why do you feel the need to explain yourself when no one even asked? That's not confidence, that's a fracture. But here's the good news. Fractures can be healed. Every piece of yourself you gave away, you can take it back, not out of spite, but out of truth. And the thing about truth, it doesn't argue, it doesn't beg, it doesn't need to be loud, it just stands. And once you start living from that place, everything changes. You stop attracting people who want to use you. You stop being manipulated by flattery. You stop shrinking yourself just to avoid being misunderstood. You become grounded, rooted, whole. Not a performance, not a projection, just you. And it shows in your posture, in your words, in your silence. You start speaking less, but saying more. You stop reacting to every comment and start picking your battles wisely. You begin walking away from anything that doesn't align, not out of fear, but from clarity. Because now you're not chasing love. You are love. You're not begging for respect. You embody it. You're not proving your worth. You own it. And when people realize they can no longer reach the version of you that needed their approval, they panic. They'll say you've changed, that you're distant, that you're cold now. But you're not cold. You're clear. Clear about who you are. Clear about what you will and won't tolerate. Clear about what deserves your energy and what doesn't. And in that clarity, you find something most people never do: freedom. You stop reacting. You stop being emotional labor for people who refuse to do their own work. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You just live, fully, honestly, authentically. And that right there is when you become a threat, not to individuals, but to systems. Systems built on obedience, on needing to be liked, on performance. You're not a puppet anymore. You've cut the strings. You've stopped playing the role. And now you're writing a new script, one written from the inside, not the outside. One built on truth, not approval. One rooted in your own values, not someone else's version of success. And that is ownership. Not of money, not of possessions, of yourself. That's the real wealth, the real power. The kind no one can take and no one can fake. Until you own yourself, you'll be owned by others. But once you reclaim every lost, hidden, beautiful part of who you are, that's it. No one owns you again. If you've made it this far, then deep down, you already know this isn't a war with the world. It's a war with yourself. And most people, they don't win that war. Not because they're weak, but because they don't even know they're fighting it. They move through life convinced they're free, never questioning why they do what they do, why they feel what they feel, why they choose what they choose. But when you finally start asking the hard questions like, why do I feel this way? Or whose voice is this in my head? You begin to pull back the curtain. You realize you've been driven by guilt you didn't earn, by shame that was never yours, by beliefs planted in you before you were old enough to say no. And that's what Jung wanted you to understand. Real freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's knowing who wants it. Because until you can look yourself in the eye and know exactly who's looking back, you're still playing a role, one you didn't even audition for. And every decision from that place, every job you take, every person you date, every argument you have, it's not the real you. It's the world's version of you. But here's the truth. You weren't born to be a puppet. You were born to be a presence. And presence doesn't perform. It doesn't explain. It doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be felt. Presence just is. It exists in silence. It exists in self-trust. It exists in the moment you stop hiding, the moment you stop blaming, the moment you stop trying to fix yourself and instead start asking, what parts of me have I been carrying that were never mine to begin with? Because that's what it comes down to. Every time you react out of fear, you're being owned. Every time you silence yourself to be liked, you're being owned. Every time you twist yourself into something, you're not just to feel safe, you're not in control. You're leased, you're rented. You're a product of expectations, of fear, of a lifelong craving to not be alone. But now, that ends. Now you step into the fire of asking real questions, the fire of standing still when everything inside wants to run, the fire of truth. You look in the mirror not for the polished version, not for the curated image, but for the raw reality of you. You ask, who am I when there's nothing left to prove? And you don't ask because it sounds good. You ask because it's time to get free. Because when you start owning yourself truly, deeply, unapologetically, things start falling away. The fake friends who only liked your mask gone. The relationships built on your people-pleasing gone. The habits that numbed your truth, the shame you inherited, the roles you thought you had to place on. And what's left? You, the real you. The one who doesn't need to perform. The one who's powerful even in silence. The one who stands even when alone. You don't flinch when provoked. You don't explain when misunderstood. You don't chase what walks away. You don't beg for seats at tables that were never meant for you. Because now you've built your own. And it's not built on performance, it's built on truth. Carl Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. And now, you're awakening to the reality that no one else gets to give you permission to be you. That your shadow, those messy hidden parts you tried to outrun, they weren't your enemy. They were your map. They were your power. And now that you've looked inward, really looked, there's no going back. You see now the world doesn't need another perfect version of you. It needs the real one. Not polished, not filtered, not always calm or composed, but true. And truth doesn't get owned. You don't owe anyone the version of you that keeps them comfortable. You don't owe your past your loyalty. You don't owe your trauma the steering wheel. What you owe is to yourself. To show up fully, with all your pieces, your rage, your tenderness, your silence, your story, and say, this is me. I'm not hiding anymore. Because when you stop hiding from yourself, you stop shrinking for others. You stop letting the world define your worth. You stop needing applause to feel real. You stop being tossed around by the expectations of others, and instead, you anchor. And people feel that. They feel it when your words are few, but your presence speaks volumes. When you walk into a room and the energy shifts. When your silence makes others question their own noise. That's what self-possession feels like. And no, not everyone will understand it. Some people will leave. Some will be threatened. Some will call you distant, detached, even selfish. Let them. Let them misunderstand you. Let them underestimate you. Let them talk. Because distance doesn't mean disconnection. It means elevation. You're not above them. You're just no longer willing to betray yourself to keep them comfortable. That's not selfish, that's sacred. You've taken back the parts of yourself you gave away. And you've brought them home. You've chosen solitude over performance, peace over proving, stillness over chasing. And now, you're no longer owned. You own your voice, so you don't have to raise it just to be heard. You own your space, so you don't have to beg for room to exist. You own your silence, so you don't have to fill it with empty words to feel valuable. You own your life. And in a world designed to keep you insecure, distracted, performative, that's the most dangerous thing you can do. Because now everything about you begins to change. You're not chasing meaning, you're creating it. You're not living for the next like or the next nod of approval. You're living in alignment with who you are, with what you know, with what you feel. And alignment, it doesn't need applause. It doesn't need validation. It just is. So the question is, will you keep performing? Will you keep trading your identity for scraps of attention? Or will you step fully into the version of yourself that no longer needs to be liked to feel worthy? The version that walks into every room, not hoping to be accepted, but already accepting themselves. Because that version of you, the grounded, powerful, self-owned version, doesn't just exist. It's waiting. Beneath the layers, beneath the fear, beneath everything the world told you to be. And when you finally touch it, when you finally live from that place, you stop being reactive. You stop being fragile. You stop being controlled. You stop living as someone who's waiting to be chosen. Because now, you've chosen yourself. And once you do that, everything starts to belong to you. You don't explain anymore. You don't chase. You don't beg. You simply live with a presence that commands without needing to control, a stillness that speaks without saying a word. People feel it in how you speak. They feel it in how you say no without guilt, how you walk away without drama, how you protect your peace like it's sacred because it is. And they may not understand it. Some might even push back. They'll say you've become cold, distant, difficult. But that's not cold, that's clarity. They're not used to someone who isn't seeking their validation. They're not used to someone who won't collapse just to make others comfortable. And when you don't need their approval, when their opinions no longer shape your identity, they lose their grip. Because the version of you that needed them no longer exists. That version that constantly apologized, that over-explained, that overextended, that molded and reshaped to avoid being judged, gone. And what remains is solid, quiet, grounded, not perfect, not above it all, but real. And real is rare. Real disrupts. Real doesn't perform. Real just shows up and stands there unshaken. So the world reacts. It will try to pull you back into the old pattern, into the noise, into the role you played for so long. Let it. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand. Let them call you names, because you've stopped betraying yourself to be understood. And that, more than anything else, is freedom. You've come home to yourself. You've reclaimed every piece of you, your joy, your anger, your grief, your silence. You've chosen depth over noise, integrity over image. And now when you speak, it lands. Not because it's louder, but because it's real. That's ownership, not of things, but of your being. And no one can take that from you. Because you didn't borrow it. You built it. You faced the parts you once avoided. You stared into your shadow and didn't run. You felt the discomfort and chose to stay. You stopped outsourcing your worth. You stopped asking for permission. You stopped performing for a world that thrives on insecurity, and you wrote your own script. One that doesn't shift with every opinion. One that doesn't bend with every gust of rejection. You are now rooted, and rooted people, they don't chase storms, they weather them. Because they've already been through the most dangerous one, the storm inside. And they made it through. Carl Jung wasn't warning us. He was offering us the path back to wholeness, to ownership, to self-possession, Until you own yourself, you'll be owned by everything else. But the second you choose to reclaim what you gave away, the second you decide to walk through your life, no longer needing permission, you become something unstoppable. You don't need to prove. You don't need to impress. You don't need to explain. You just are. And in that being, you become something the world doesn't know what to do with. Because the world can't control someone who doesn't fear being misunderstood. It can't manipulate someone who's already accepted their darkness. It can't shame someone who has nothing left to hide. And that's the key. You don't become free by being perfect. You become free by being whole, by facing every piece of who you are and saying, yes, this is me, and I don't need to be anything else. Because when you live like that, when you move through the world as someone who no longer performs but possesses, everything changes. The noise fades, the inner war ends, and peace, real peace, begins.